I got a question for you. Go ahead. How much work you save on your group?
Thank you, sir. I did not want to have to scold a council member in the back of the room. All right. Good evening again. Thank you so much. And we've got Mayor Arnold with us online, and hopefully we've got some of the community tuned in as well. So Mayor Arnold, I will go ahead and get ready to turn it over to you. But first, so I am Marie Peoples. I am the city manager. Look forward to meeting each of you. And again, thank you for being here. This is going to be a lot of information packed into an hour. There will be other opportunities as the council does their work and seats the selected members. There will be other opportunities for information, for training, and as that work forms. So this is really meant to be a cursory overview of what is to come. And with that, Mayor Arnold.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Peoples. First, let me apologize for not being in the room. As some of you know, COVID has caught up with me finally. So thankfully it's a very mild case at this point. So I wanted to jump in here, even if it's from my basement where I am hiding out for the time being. So I do want to echo Dr. Peoples' thanks to you for being there. Whether you're going to apply for the commission or whether you just want more information, this Charter Commission will do better with more community involvement, more community attention to it. And this is the start of that. So thanks for participating with us. This is obviously an incredibly important task at hand to consider revisions to what is our Constitution. And so what we'll do, I think right now, next slide, we want to go ahead? Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the agenda. I'm going to join you for the first 3 items, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to the city attorney and the city manager who are in the room who will go over some of those details with you. So we're going to start with these introductions. Obviously, I'll talk a little bit in a minute about our basic form of government and where we stand in the history of our charter. Then city attorney will talk to you about number 4, which is, I think, the meat of the discussion. What is it that the Charter Commission is going to do, and what kind of recommendations can they make and should they make? And then we'll talk about the timeline and also then talk about what the final product is going to look like. And I do believe Dr. Peoples will review what resources are available, because we will make plenty of resources available to the Charter Review Advisory Board, because again, we need this to be a smoothly operating, well-informed group of people. So Eric, we can go on to the next slide, please.
Mayor Arnold, if I can for just a
Please.
moment, we didn't anticipate addressing questions, and we did have a hand raised in the room. And again, I don't know who all will be online, but perhaps if there's a few minutes at the very end, we could take a moment to answer any questions that are remaining. There is not a handout, but this is being recorded and it will be online and available. So take notes if you would like, but it will be available.
And if you're going to use a framework from which to take notes, I would recommend you use the agenda, because that, of course, those are the topics that we're going to cover. So when you do that, that would also be online. We don't have a printed one. We just have what you're seeing right here. But again, that's to me, if you were going to plug it into something, that's what I would do.
All right. Obviously, I'm Mayor Laura Arnold, the city manager. Dr. Peoples has introduced herself. We also have with us City Attorney Neil Bruntrager. And, you know, I liked the little graphic, which was a contribution from Dr. Peoples, I believe, because what we're focusing on here is good governance, and good governance comes from an informed and involved community. And that's what we need from our Charter Commission. If you go ahead, Eric. First thing we really need to talk about is to understand our basic form of government. You know, there are a lot of people out there. I just got elected mayor, and there are a lot of people who think I have a whole bunch of power to just do things like I want to do them. Guess what? I do not. We operate under a council manager system of government, which was adopted during that charter of 1954. So in our Constitution, that is the defined system that we work under. And as the bullet point there says, the council has the legislative power and the manager has the executive power. Well, what does that mean a little bit more specifically? The manager is the chief administrative officer of the city. That means the manager's job is to supervise and hire personnel, to supervise the provision of services, draft the budget, and implement the policies that the council sets. The job of the council then is to make policy, to consult with our constituents and make policies that we think are in the best interest of the community, and we also then supervise the city manager. The mayor's role is one as serving as the public face of the city for a lot of things. I do ceremonial things all the time, but I also preside at city council meetings and help to set the agenda for those meetings and facilitate communication from the council with other entities in our community. So keep in mind, as we're talking about this is the original 1954 vision of government for our city. As we talk about the changes, no changes have been made to that basic structure at this time, up until this time. All right, Eric, I think we can go ahead. So those of you who are history buffs, if we talk about the history of the charter, and no, I'm not going to do a really deep dive in this, although I think it's actually very fascinating. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version because we need to get to the meat of what the Charter Commission is doing. And it just dawned on me that probably anybody who's under 30 has no idea what Cliff Notes are. So excuse me for that reference. The 1954 original charter was essentially the output of what is probably the most tumultuous time in Webster Groves city politics ever. In 1949, we opened a swimming pool in our community, and it was a whites only swimming pool. Members of the North Webster community, a couple of them who had come back from fighting in World War II, tested that, is it whites only? We want to come swim. Not only did the administrators of the pool deny them entry, the mayor and the city council, at least a portion of the city council, showed up to say this is a whites only pool. So for the remainder of that 1949 swim season, it remained a whites only pool. The first day or second day of opening in 1950, an injunction was sought to allow all residents of Webster Groves to swim in the pool. The judge scheduled the trial for September, which means we had another season of whites only swimming. The city leaders lost that lawsuit in the fall, but rather than going along with the court findings, they closed the pool for an additional year. So that gets us to 1953, when it took a public vote of citizens to open the pool to all residents. At the same time of that public vote, the voters of Webster Groves got rid of the mayor and every council member, and they created what's called a board of freeholders. That board of freeholders was our first charter commission, and that gets us the 1954 charter. As you can see, we've had 3 subsequent revisions to that charter. In 1965, after about a decade, they decided they needed to go in and clean up some things that hadn't worked exactly the way they anticipated. At least that's the way the newspaper accounts characterize that. And in the 1970, so we had 21 amendments in that 1964, 1970, we had 7 amendments. Those were largely non-controversial, and a few of them at least were simply to make us in accordance with state law at the time. 2001, which I'm sure some of you in the room, I can't see who's in the room, but I'm guessing there are a number of you in the room who remember well the charter discussion of 2001. And that really, we had 7 amendments there as well, all passed at a public vote. The controversy there was about who supervises staff. And the charter, one of the charter amendments increased the penalty for council members interfering with staff or giving directions to staff. Because remember, the council has to act as a body, not as individuals who want something from staff. So even I can't say to the city manager, go do this. It's got to be something that the council has decided on. So again, in 2001, we have this passed. As you know, April of this year, the residents of Webster Groves overwhelmingly voted to form a charter commission. And that's what our Charter Review Advisory Board, excuse me, I'll use the right term. And that's where we sit right now. And I encourage you all, we want as many people to apply as possible because we're hoping to represent a wide variety of people within Webster Groves for selection. And with that, I will stop and let Mr. Bruntrager take over.
Thank you, Mayor. I will point out that the chair from the 2001 last Charter Commission that sat is here tonight, Kim Pepple, is here, and came up and introduced. I've of course known him for a lot of years, but reminded me that he had served at that time. So we have a historic voice on in the room as well, and perhaps that would be useful. So So I'm going to talk about what the mayor has identified as the meat and potatoes of your powers if you decide to apply and if you are asked to serve on the advisory board. We look two places when we're looking to see what your powers are in city government. We look first to the charter. And in the very last section of the charter, section 15.21 and 15.22, it talks about a charter review and charter amendments and how they are done. There are three ways essentially that they are done. They can be done by the council themselves. They can make their own decisions about what they think should be amendments to the charter. The second would be, and all of those ultimately have an end that gets presented to the people for a vote. But the second way to do it is by initiative, by the people of the city of Webster Groves having a certain percentage of the last vote. If they present a petition, they can also submit things. And the third way to do this is through a charter advisory commission. So you are acting in the third capacity. And again, the important thing and the difference between what you would do as a charter advisory board versus the council's choices or versus the initiative is that you would be taking a longer time, perhaps, to make decisions about what the amendment might be. You will have certain powers that I'm going to talk about for just a moment that are found in the code and certain procedures that are found in the code that give you a chance to do a deeper dive, to delve into issues, to communicate with the community, to determine what the community might like to see, gather information, and make a recommendation. But the operative word and the big difference between what you as an advisory commission would do and what the other two processes would be is that you are simply advising. You're making a recommendation. Okay, the recommendation is not binding on council. It's like the Planning and Zoning Commission. They hear evidence. They hear petitions that are placed before them. They make decisions about the zoning code, and then they make recommendations to council. It's not a binding recommendation upon council. When we look to the actual day-to-day rules, we now turn to the charter, and that would be found in chapter 4, which is boards and commissions. And in particular, what we're looking for is section 4.410, and that is Article 8, which is the Charter Review Advisory Board. It tells us first and foremost what you have to do in order to be a member. And I'm going to turn to that very quickly, if I may. And it's pretty simple. You have to live in Webster Groves and you have to be alive. The board shall consist of 9 electors. The members shall serve until removed or discharged by council. The council shall elect its own chairman and vice chairman for such terms as the board may determine, and the board may adopt from time to time such rules and regulations as it may deem necessary to carry out the rules. So the charter tells us that you as an advisory board are going to be appointed by council, but this now says, of course, that there will be, and the code says this as well, there are 9 of you, total of 9. And the first thing you do if you are on this thing is you are going to elect a chair and a vice chair. You also may adopt your own rules and regulations. So once you have been formed into an advisory board itself, you will then decide how it is you run your meetings. You will decide how often you're going to meet. You will decide the nuts and bolts of what the advisory board is going to do. And that is found in section 4.410. The next section talks about meetings, and it says the meetings of the board shall be held at the call of the chairman, not the call of the council, at the call of the chairman, and at such other times as the board may determine. So again, the chairman can call a meeting, but the board can also, under certain circumstances, call for a meeting, even if the chairman has not. You're going to have a quorum in order to do that, and you're going to have a majority of the board who's going to vote on that, but you would have the power to do that. That would be something we would deal with back in that first section where we would talk about establishing your own rules and regulations. And you might even, by the way, decide to adopt the rules and regulations from the last board that sat from 99 to 2001. That would be up to you as a board if you are appointed. All meetings of the boards except executive sessions shall be open to the public. So these are going to be public meetings. They will be held in a place where the public can be heard. You will decide whether or not you are going to set up public comment, when you will set up public comment. There's nothing in these in the charter or code provisions that mandate it. Pardon me. However, one of the things that council is looking for are people who would serve on this advisory board who are interested in the community's thoughts. And so the best way, of course, to collect those thoughts is by having a time when there is public comment that is going to be gathered. Again, that's a decision that you will make. It will be part of what you will address in your rules and regulations. If you're going to do it, you will publish these meetings, but if you're going to serve on the board, all the meetings will be published. Sunshine Law requires that these be public meetings and that they be published and that they be open to the public. So again, what you're going to do, how you're going to do that, that's going to be up to you. But there is a strong desire among council to make sure that we are hearing from the community itself. The third section of Chapter 4 talks about duties. And you'd think that it will give you some details about what those duties might be. It doesn't. It says the Charter Review Advisory Board shall act in an advisory capacity to the council in matters pertaining to the amendment of the charter of the city only as may be directed by the council from time to time. Now, we've changed that a little bit because we amended our own charter to include a provision that said at least every 8 years, we have to have a Charter Advisory Review Board. And that is always going to happen in conjunction with a mayoral election. So at least once every 8 years, we're going to raise this question and review this so that we don't have these large gaps of time that exist. And maybe as we get into this routine, maybe we find that at the end of 8 years, we've done such a great job the last time that we don't have to make any changes this time. But again, we're still going to go through the process to review and make sure that there are no changes that the community wants. So the duties are there. It says, again, you're going to act in an advisory matter in matters pertaining to the amendment of the charter. And you shall make such reports to the council regarding matters referred to by the board or the council. Now, once you make your referrals or your recommendations to the council, then the council will decide, because again, it's only a recommendation, whether they in fact are going to adopt those and they are going to propose that those go to the ballot. If they do adopt your proposals, it will go to the public vote. And then in the charter, we have a provision that says when that must happen. We try and do that in conjunction with the existing election calendar in order to control costs. The cost of a special election, if we didn't schedule it when routine elections are going to be handled, the cost of a special election can be truly prohibitive. So again, we want to be very careful about how we do this. So going to the first bullet point, what can you do and what can't you do? I've addressed that generally and said what you can do is make recommendations to the council. There are truly no limits on what those recommendations might be. The only thing that you have to remember is that any recommendations that come out of the Advisory Review Board have to be voted upon by the board and presented by the board. So again, it's not a situation where you as a board member have any particular voice beyond the collective voice that you have in the council. You can do most anything in terms of charter review, anything that you think must be done. The only thing you can't do in a charter advisory review board is say, dump the charter. That's done other places and in other ways, okay? So again, the idea here is that we're going to improve upon, we're going to change the existing charter. So really, that's the only thing you can't do. In terms of the council role, that's an important thing to remember. We've talked about this in the context of council liaisons. Most boards have a council liaison. That means someone at the council attends these boards and commission meetings. Why? So that they can report back to council about what's going on, not to influence or affect what happens in that council meeting. The same would be true for a charter advisory board. Council may attend, just like anyone may attend, but they're there as a citizen. Even if they've been appointed as a liaison, they have no voice in what you as a board does. If you have questions for them, you can direct those questions, but understand that they are not speaking for council. The only way, as the mayor said in the very beginning of this thing, the only way council members have a voice is as a collective. So again, while they may be there to answer your questions, while they may be there to listen, and they may even advise you if you have some questions about procedure or something like that. They may even be able to say, look, this is how we typically do things, or this is how we've done things in the past, assuming that they have that information. Generally speaking, I'm going to refer you to Katie Nakazano on a question like that. However, they can be there, but their role is as an observer. You, as the advisory board, are the ones making the decisions. Now, again, the demand for public input is important. It is important that the public be heard. Whether you do this in the form of town hall, whether you publish this as this is going to be the night when we're going to take a pulse of the community and open the floor to the public to speak, that's up to you. How you do it, that's up to you. But you're strongly encouraged to do something like that. Whether you do it at every meeting Whether you do it at some meetings, whether you do it at one meeting, that's going to be up to you. But again, I would encourage you not to do it at every meeting because you're going to have trouble getting anything done. I would encourage you to limit when you do that. But again, make sure that people have a voice. And I would do it on more than one occasion, because even though Zoom gives opportunities and makes it remarkably convenient to attend, it's not always. And so again, having more than one meeting where that gets done would certainly be a recommendation, and a strong recommendation I would make. The voters' roll, again, we've talked about that briefly, but in the end, everything goes to the ballot. And every single recommendation that you make is going to be a separate ballot initiative. So if you recall, a couple of years ago when we amended the charter, we had two things that were on there. One was, does the city attorney have to live in Webster Groves? Because somebody said we don't have enough lawyers in Webster Groves. So we changed that, but that was a separate rule, that there was a separate amendment that was on the charter provision. We also had one on there that had this particular requirement for every 8 years having a charter advisory review board. So we don't say, look, there are 15 recommendations or 21 recommendations. Do you say yes or no? You get to say yes or no as a voter to each and every one of those. So again, sometimes, and we saw in 1970, I think it was, you had 21 charter amendments that were on there. How long did that take to vote? Okay. But again, you say yes or you say no to any one of those. That's the voter's role. And the voter ultimately is the one who will make the decision. And finally, sunshine requirements. I made a mention of the fact that every meeting that you have is going to be an open meeting. While sunshine allows you under some circumstances to go to what's called an executive session, where you can close your doors, that's a closed meeting, and those are found under 610.021 of the revised codes of the state of Missouri, revised statutes of the state of Missouri. And there are very specific things you can close a meeting for, but candidly, I can't think of a reason why you could close a charter advisory review meeting. Now, again, I'm sure someone will accept that challenge and find something that will allow me to fit something in under a closed meeting. But again, the idea here is transparency, right? The idea is to make sure that people are seeing what you're doing, that people know what you're thinking, and then ultimately when they voice their opinions, again, they will be informed about what your thinking processes might be. So sunshine does control. The important thing to remember there, and again, if you are ultimately appointed to this, I would suggest that in the very first meeting, we'll again talk about sunshine and its implications, because anything you do as an advisory board member that is done in that capacity as an advisory board member not only needs to be open, but if it's a document, if it's paper, if it's things like emails, they need to be preserved and they need to be archived. So we'll talk about what that means. All right. And again, I'm going to recommend that if you're on this advisory board, that we will set up a special email for you where you are communicating amongst yourselves. That makes it very easy for us to archive those emails. Okay. And so again, what we're ultimately telling you is that there are some rules that you have to apply and that you have to abide by. But those are, again, designed to make sure that what you do is transparent, that people can see it, that people can understand it. That was a lot said in a very short period of time. So we're going, again, I will tell you, there's a few places I want you to look, and let me reiterate what the mayor said. In order to understand charter review, you have to understand the charter. In order to understand the charter, you have to read the charter. It's online. We have it on the website. It's not long. It's not complicated. You will see that it's very general. And charters by their nature are general, as opposed to our code, which is very specific. They accomplish two very different purposes. When you create a charter, it's created with the idea that it's going to last 30 years or 50 years or 100 years, like the Constitution of the United States. It is a very broad document, which allows for amendments so that we can accommodate change as we need to and as we desire to accommodate change. All right. But we don't go through and specify a lot in the charter. We talk about general powers. We talk about general information. That's what a charter does. The second thing I would strongly encourage you to do is study up on what our form of government is, because people don't understand it. People believe that the mayor has veto power, that the mayor is actually running the city. The mayor is running the meetings, and the mayor is, of course, the mayor and is the ceremonial head, but the mayor is a council member. No single council person has any authority or any power. The only power they have is as a council. okay? But you need to know that and you need to understand that. And again, there are a couple of different publications that I would tell you are out there. One is published by the Missouri Municipal League, and it's a guide to newly elected officials. And it gives you a great deal of information about government, about municipal government in the state of Missouri. It talks about where it comes from. It talks about what the authority is. So we, as a charter form of government, we're created by the state legislature. We were given a mandate by the legislature, and we have tremendous delegated powers. We effectively have all the powers that the state legislature has. If you are what we call a statutory city, and we often hear about them, a class 3 or a class 4 city, the mayor has a great deal of power. The mayor has veto power. That's not something that exists in a charter form of government. You need to know that in order to be fully informed on what you're advising upon, all right? So there is some homework that's involved before you even start the process. And again, there are a number of resources online that will allow you to figure out what all those things are. And I would strongly encourage you to go look at those things, because coming in with an idea is going to make all of this make a whole lot more sense, okay? So you will be given as many resources as you ask for. I intend to be at your meetings there solely in an advisory capacity on legal questions that you may have. The city manager has indicated she intends to be there, and she told me I had to be there too. So that's how you're going to get me at all these meetings. But again, we're going to be there in order to make sure that we're giving you the resources that you need. If you have questions, we're going to make sure we provide the answers as quickly as we can, and with an eye towards the value of your time. So what we can answer at the meetings, we're going to answer for you at the meetings. If it requires us to get back to you and give you information for the next meeting, we'll do that. We want to make sure that your time in the meetings is valuably spent and productively and efficiently spent. And so again, the more information we can give you at the meetings, the better off we are, okay? So having said that, I will turn it over to our city manager.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And actually, Mayor, I didn't know if you wanted to do this one or not, but it is pretty self-explanatory for folks online and in the room, but there, of course, is a process and a timeline. The timeline could be fluid depending on member applications and how those interview processes go. But this is the suggested timeline and when the meetings would start, which meets October 22nd. Those recommendations hopefully would be prepared to go to council by November 23rd. 23rd. Thank you. Council considers recommendations, council refers recommendations to voters, and as city attorney indicated, hopefully would align up with an election already scheduled and on the ballot rather than calling for a special election. Again, this could be fluid depending on the work of the Charter Review Advisory Board members. So that is just a suggested timeline.
If I can just hop in, Madam City Manager, there is a typo here. I think the council intended the April 2024 election.
Thank you.
So.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the reason that the April election period is taken is that there are certain elections that are scheduled every year. The April election is known as the municipal election. So again, in terms of keeping with the least expensive process, that would be the way to do that. So in terms of the timeline, reiterating what the city manager has said, what Dr. Peoples has said, the only meeting that the council will set for you is your first meeting. After that, it's up to you. And as Kim Pebble told me the last time it took 2 years in order to get the recommendations that were there. And there were more than 7 recommendations that were made. It's my understanding 7 were ultimately adopted by council. It takes a while, again, just to make sure that you're truly doing your due diligence in that regard. But this is a proposed timeline that we would like to make sure things get done by. The only end that we really need to keep in line with is the elections. The elections don't have to be municipal. You can do them at the national election. There's also an August election that we can do, but the April one is the one we would shoot for. I got it. All right. So the Charter Review Advisory Board's final product, again, as I've said to you several times, you're ultimately going to prepare a report. That report is going to be presented to council, and that will be done at a regular council meeting. That will be an agenda item that will be presented to council. Council then will decide what they're going to do with your various recommendations. It could be voted upon in one meeting. It could take 5 meetings. It just depends. Okay. The changes, as you can see here, can range from no proposed amendments. And there will be some things that we can do, by the way, that are going to be minimal, like, for instance, gender corrections. There are a few things like that we can do that sort of brings it into the 21st century that doesn't probably require a vote of the people. But again, it could be from nothing, no proposed amendments, to separate individual proposed amendments, to a whole proposed new charter. You could basically dump it and start again, okay? So those are your options. I would also encourage you to read, there are a number of things that talk about city charters and the purposes of city charters, not just what it does, but again, the purposes of city charter. Read that. If you understand the philosophy behind it, the political philosophy behind it, again, I think it will be easier for you to perform your task if you're appointed to the board.
Neil, if I might interject just for a moment, we're saying do your homework, do some reading. I just want to let people know that the city manager and I have begun to collect some resources that will be placed on the Charter Review Advisory Board website. So you don't just have to Google charter and go around the web. We'll have some directed resources for you, especially from the National Civic League, the National League of Cities, and as you said, the Missouri Municipal League.
All right. Well, so both the mayor and city attorney have made this slide very easy for me. They've both named several resources, and we are indeed collecting all of those resources. Some people like paper products. We will have binders with those readings available, but we'll also place all of these items, and so they'll be made available to email as well, but we'll place all of these items on the website that's already been developed for this Charter Review Advisory Board. And so that will be available to not just the members, but to the public as well. In terms of other resources, you of course will have the council liaison, and you will have myself as your city liaison staff. In many ways, I'll serve as your research arm. Are there other publications that the group is interested in? Are there, outstanding questions? And so I'll be happy to get that information for you. My primary job will be to coordinate with the chair and vice chair as that group forms, and those parameters for meetings and when they're set and how the agendas will roll out. Much of that work in terms of your resources will become known as the members meet and those discussions are had.
I suspect too, and again, I think that this bears repeating. I mentioned it earlier, but I do want to repeat it because it is important. Council has some very distinct ideas about what they would like to see. It is well within their purview, and it doesn't offend the dignity of what you would do as a board for them to make recommendations to you. Again, these are things we'd like you to talk about because I think their hope is that you will have your finger on the pulse of the community. They will make certain recommendations to you, and that is absolutely appropriate to do. There's no problem with that, all right? But understand that's merely a recommendation that they're asking you to consider as an advisory board itself. So again, there's nothing wrong with that, and there'll be no problem with that. You will have friends and neighbors and other folk who will come up and want to talk to you about that. There's nothing about those conversations that you need to shy away from. Have those conversations, all right? So if somebody says, hey, we want to talk to you, talk to them. But if they have strong opinions, say, hey, look, you need to come to the meeting that we're going to have these public comments. Make sure that you do come. Because again, that's ultimately what you want to do. You want to get these things on the record. Again, while we certainly would applaud you going out and doing as much research as you can about what people want to do, that's the sort of thing that you really want to make sure you're sharing with everybody. And it's best to come from the people that are making the recommendations. There are no firm rules and regulations about how the meetings get held. You'll make those decisions. There's no evidentiary rules. It's not formal, it's informal. We will apply Robert's Rules of Order, by the way, just so that there is a process that we follow. But again, we'll have a parliamentarian there for you, and we'll make sure that we're doing everything that we need to do. It will not impede your process or slow you down. Okay.
Excellent.
And one other thing that I want to say, part of the reason that's so important is to make sure that you're bringing people in and listening to people and doing your homework, is because ultimately, even if council makes the recommendation, it's still up to you. If a council person says to you, here's what I want, it's still up to you. And you need to make decisions because they're your decisions, not because someone else has asked you to rule or vote in a certain way. It should be your considered vote, which is why doing the homework in advance is so very, very important. Come in with your own thoughts and processes.
Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to council, perhaps having some ideas on charter amendments, staff have also been putting together a list of things. And most of those admittedly are technical types of provisions. It's, you know, names of departments, a lot of things that have evolved and are now outdated. And so as they do their work, those sorts of recommendations. So I am very excited about this process and look forward to it getting underway and being the liaison and working with each of the members. So this will be hopefully a great community process as well, as we have all the information on the website, and hopefully it will be attended, maybe even more popular than council meetings. We'll see. Madam Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you. We still have plenty of time, not that we have to use it all, but we certainly have time.
Sure. I think what we'll do in just a second is open it up for questions. I do want to clarify one thing that was said. Every 8 years, we aren't required to have a charter review advisory board. We're required to ask the voters if they want one. So that's just a kind of a technicality, but I think it goes to the point of, if this round goes for a couple of years and does really, really well, I doubt voters are going to ask us to come back and do it again so quickly. So just keep that in mind, is that we don't do this every 8 years. We ask the voters whether they want to do it every 8 years. And I just want to say thank you both to Neil and Marie for the good job and putting this together today so that people do understand what they're getting into. The one thing that we really haven't mentioned, and I do want to mention this, in putting out the application, and those applications are open, you can get them on the city website. There are really two things. Interviews will happen in August, and council right now is compiling questions. And if you apply, you'll be provided with those questions in advance, so you get a chance to think about them. But we are really seeking people who can definitely commit the time. This is not something that you just say, hey, this is kind of neat, I think I'll do it, because the expectation is that there's real hard work to be done. And we want people who are going to commit their time and their mental resources to having a successful result. The second thing is that in seeking the board, the council has made very clear that we want diversity in every way you can think about it. Geographically, north, south, east, west, age, race, gender. We want a microcosm of our community and to make sure that everyone is well represented, or at least has a voice in this process by a decision maker. So I just want to make that clear as well. And then the last thing I'll say, and then we can turn it over to questions, is I do want to reiterate, council has made it very clear in our discussions that public input is a big part of this. And I appreciate Neil mentioning that several times, because it is definitely the council's wish that whatever is recommended to us as a council has been discussed by the community broadly and not just by the commission itself. All right, so I think time for questions if anyone has them.
In the room, if we can ask folks to come up to the microphone so folks on Zoom could hear. Thank you.
When you mentioned that one of the options was to have a whole new charter, it made me wonder, with some of those national and statewide resources, is there like a uniform or form of charter that we could use as a starting point if we wanted to do that?
Yes, and there are any number of, if you go online and say municipal charter and Google that, you will have thousands of charters from which to choose. You will find that the elements are the same. In most of these charters. There will be slight differences here and there, regional, for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
But you'll find lots of resources that are there. But there are also things, particularly with the Municipal League and with the national, I'm sorry, Mayor, what is the name of the larger organization? The National
Civic League.
The National Civic League, yes. They have recommended what I would call templates.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they have the component parts, the things that you must have in order to make a charter work. So it'll talk about all the various things that, again, the various items that need to be included. The details then become up to you. But yes, there are a number of resources, very easy to find.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
If you do start early with the National Civic League, they have a recent publication, Model City Charter. It's fantastic.
Great, thank you.
They also have a handbook for charter commissions that kind of goes in tandem with that model.
Thank you.
And if you're not sleeping, I recommend both of those.
Other questions in the room?
On Zoom, they can raise their hand or type in the Q&A.
Okay. If you have a question, please.
I can't see.
Oh, come on up. Sorry.
So obviously, the city council's participation in this process would be enormously helpful. How would you describe the purview of the council's contribution to that process versus, what this board would accomplish? Like, just humorously in my mind, I thought like, oh, they're getting us to do their dirty work, So obviously that's not the intent, but is there a certain purview that they would have as part of this process that would guide what sorts of recommendations they would make versus, what the civilian board would make?
Mayor, you want to start? I have some definite thoughts there, but
yeah,
if you
I'll be brief. I think the council, as has been said before, will have some ideas, but every member of the council is also aware that what we send to the Charter Commission are nothing but ideas. And part of this is to just give a voice to people in the community to help us make some of these decisions. I think sort of sometimes the hesitation is, well, we do all this work and we send it to council and then council decides not to send it to the voters. That could happen. I'm not suggesting that that won't happen, but if that happens, there will have been a huge process of public input, I think both at the council level and at the level of the charter board. So, that doesn't answer your question very well, I don't think, because it is designed to have you all really be the decision makers, at least at this first stage.
Is there a list of, just like with the city employees, is there a list of council, like a wish list of sorts?
I'm collecting it right now.
Yeah. There's nothing published at this point. There have been discussions about this because this has been something that has been, charter review has been on the table for a very long time. So there've been bits and pieces of meetings, at least from December of 18, when I became city attorney. There have been conversations about it ever since then. But let's go back, because again, I want to augment what the mayor has said and really what you just said, because the council's role can be helpful, but they're asking you to undertake an enormous process. And in order to do that in a respectful manner, they have to give the authority that you as a board have under the charter. So if they were really trying to control it or just have you do the dirty work, that'd be easy. The charter says they can do it. They can make any recommendations they want, and they don't have to go through a process other than a vote of council. So the idea here is that they're valuing what you as a citizen are going to be suggesting would be an important or at least a suggested change to the charter itself. And they want your voice. They want to hear from you. They can hear from them, but they want to hear from you. So again, in order to make this work, and the whole reason that this was implemented in the first place on a regular 8-year schedule is to make sure that the community had that voice. So it's not a situation where, there's sort of a shadow agenda that's being run behind this. That's really never been what's gone on here. The idea here is that, look, part of government is constantly sort of reinventing yourself and thinking about where you are. But the only way you can truly do that, according to this council's philosophy, and I will say that this is abjectly clear, is that they want to hear from the people. And so, again, there you are.
And are there certain areas that are sort of, known suspects of, these are problematic parts of the charter that, would require a special focus, that the council might say, hey, take a closer look at these particular parts?
I would say no. I would tell you that there are a couple of themes that have come up, and one of them is wards. Okay. So again, which would change the structure of a lot of things. Okay. But that's not in the charter as it exists today. There's no mention of this. Everybody, all council people are elected at large, right? So again, there are no landmines that I'm aware of in the charter that, again, are things that you need to tiptoe around. I mean, I think that everything's on the table, and that's why we had that one screen that said everything's on the table. So it's there. But that's where you again want to look at perhaps a broader scope, because if you were only going to read the charter and only going to read the code, would you necessarily think of boards? Probably not. So you got to go out to other things. And there are other places that have other ideas about how they run charter cities that may be better than our own. But again, I do think they want you to do the homework on it. So to that extent, maybe you're right. But again, It's a remarkably complicated process, as Kim can tell you, having done it for 2 years. And it is a time-consuming process.
So if I might weigh in for just a moment here, you know, the council will put together this list. Staff has put together a list. So there will be some guideposts on places to look. However, I don't expect that list to be published before the board is seated. And the reason for that is we want people who are interested in this entire process and looking at it as a collective endeavor and not saying, oh, I like number one, I don't like number two, and this is why I'm going to join the Charter Review Advisory Board. This has to be a holistic endeavor and not just about a single piece of something that someone wants to do. So again, there'll be some guidance and you know, keep in mind, it may be as much about what's not there as what is there already, because you have to look at both things.
But we do agree that we don't want to start over, right?
But here's the other thing. And again, I mean, no disrespect to council or to staff in this regard, but if they deliver you a wish list and say, these are things that wish list is perhaps the wrong word, but a list of things they'd like you to think about, it's up to you. You can say as a board, yeah, you know what? I don't like it. I don't recommend it. In the end, the recommendations have to be your own in order for this to be meaningful. Thank you.
So, oh, Eric, are you going to do the chat?
Yes, so we do have a question. Folks in the room can see it on the screen here. Councilmember Shepherd asks Neil if you can mention the difference between charter cities and other classes of cities, if you think it's important, so people can focus on charter cities and home rule while they're doing their research.
Sure. So the other classes of city that we see are what we call statutory cities. Those are cities that are based on size. So you hear about third class cities and fourth class cities. It's the size of the city that will affect those. They have duties that are set by statute as opposed to ours, which are set by charter. And so again, the idea of home rule is found in the charter. That's an important thing to recognize. Again, I would tell you that the best way to do this, the best resource for this is the guide to the newly elected official in Missouri. By the way, when you go online, it says this costs $4. It doesn't, it's free. You can download it. And it hasn't changed a whole lot, but I would tell you that's the best way to do it. And it becomes a comparative point where you're looking at, you know, what a charter city does, what a statutory city does, the role of the mayor, the role of the council. All of those things are very, very important. But as the mayor said when we started this thing, the legislative or policymaking function of the council is what happens in a charter city. Everything else is done by Dr. Peoples. So again, she's the chief executive. She's the person who makes sure that the services are provided. She hires, she fires. All of those things are the things that are done. Budgets are handled by council, but again, the city manager then must live within the budget and provide services as allowed within the budget. So again, understanding that is an important thing, but the powers of a mayor are probably the single largest differences that you will see. But again, I would encourage you to look at that publication I mentioned early on, because I think that'll give you the best direction in that regard. Yes, sir. Step up.
So Neil, real quick, while he's coming up, can you just give us a local example of a statutory city? You know, I can give people a name.
Sure. Brentwood is a statutory city. Brentwood, instead of a city manager, has a city administrator. The city administrator is answerable to the mayor. Okay. The mayor, of course, runs the meeting. The mayor has veto powers. You have a council that makes decisions about what the ordinances of the city of Brentwood are going to be. But the council can advise the mayor on various appointments, but the council doesn't control that. The mayor has a great deal of power. Council's power is not in statutory cities is very similar to the power that our councils have here. But again, the role of the city administrator is the city administrator is directly answerable to the mayor, as are all the people that are appointed in the city, directly answerable to the mayor, probably. And Brentwood is one of those places. And who wants to live there?
Just one question. You mentioned earlier the last amendments that were passed, there's 7 in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Was that also the last council, the last board that convened?
Yes.
Okay.
And Kim can give you the historical information on that, but yes, they were the last ones to convene.
I did.
He was the chair.
Just a real quick clarification. So there were amendments in 2020. That slide you saw were commission or board driven amendments. So the
Right.
council sent 2 amendments in 2020 to the people that
Right.
were enacted.
Right, right.
Thank
But the last time they convened was in 2001 after they had made that presentation.
And you mentioned earlier that there'd be a site with some resources out on it. Would by chance the minutes from the last board be available?
I know we archive all those.
Okay.
I don't know, I don't know if those are online yet, back from 2001. I think they are.
Okay,
I think they are.
okay.
And so if you go on to the Webster Groves website itself, well, you know what? I'm here. Why don't I look right now while you're standing here? Again, efficient use of your time. Let's see. So I would look under agendas and minutes, under boards and commissions. And there is a provision. So when you go under the agenda center, under boards and commissions, you select a category. And one of the things that you can do is, I'm looking to see if there is a provision.
I don't believe we have it active at this point.
We don't.
But
So
we will get the minutes. up
Yeah.
there
Okay,
and have them
cool.
on the graph.
we can find out. And if that's the case, we can post
All right, thank you.
it. Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Strippers, come on up, please.
Evening, fine,
evening.
thanks.
This commission is coming up and it's for does it last 8 years?
No, my opinion on this would be, although the charter nor the code speak to how long it lasts, I think it lasts until it presents its report to the council. And I think it would dissolve once it's fulfilled its purpose. So I don't think it is an endless commission. I think it's designed for a purpose. It's appointed by the council. One of the things that we will ultimately do is address that issue about time. Although I will tell you that both the code and the charter are silent as to that.
Okay,
And Kim and I had a very brief conversation about that one way or another. But I think once the report is presented and you have discharged your duty, your primary duty, which is that, then I think that the commission would end. The
so
advisory
then
board.
after that happens and 8 years later, they would go to the voters again?
Again, yes, although the council also can call independently of the voters. If the council felt there was a need to do something to amend the charter in the next 8 years, they could they could appoint again a charter advisory review board who would then act in the same capacity if they thought it was necessary to do it again. And then if nothing happens in the next 8 years, though, it would go back to the voters to say, do we need to do this again? Because ultimately the idea is that you, as a voter, are going to decide whether this board is going to meet.
Because I will say that the city charter is an awesome thing. I think Webster Groves is, and that's why we live here. Now, there is a few things within that charter that needs to be addressed or readvised, and that's the whole part of this board. But once that project's done, I think it needs to continue on, because as time changes, there's always going to be something that somebody wants changed.
Which
know,
is why they put
right.
the 8-year rule in. So
Okay.
at least once every 8 years, we're going to reach out to the community to say, what do you think? Does it need a change?
Okay. So where do I apply?
It's all
Thank you,
mine.
guys.
Thank you.
you. Anybody else online?
I have no hands raised and no questions.
Okay, anybody else in the room? Yes, sir.
To piggyback on what was said by the last gentleman, it would be nice to have some history. And if my math is right, over the 70 years roughly since the original charter, there have been 35 amendments, which is only one amendment every 2 years, which is kind of a relaxed pace. Now they've been clumped, which is good. I would really like to see those clumps if they would be made available, meaning the original charter, those first amendments, the next amendments, and the next amendments. I think that would be helpful to give me, since I wasn't here for all of those, a glimpse into the history. I know Mr. Pepple goes back at least that far.
How were things in 1954, Ken?
But I don't know if he was in Webster Rose that whole time. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can certainly provide some history. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Mayor, any closing words?
Nothing other than thank you all for coming. Thank you for being interested in this. I hope many of you will apply and commit to this project for our community, because that's what it really is a project for our entire community. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening now online. And if you come back and listen to the recording, we're happy you're here too.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.
You're welcome.